Hi, and welcome to ABPMP webinar on increasing the role and impact of BPM in your organization, taking BPM and BPMS-enabled BPM to the next level. I'm Rod Moyer. I hang out in the Philly area. I have a few housekeeping items here. One is that you can key in questions in the Q&A box anytime they occur to you during the presentation. We will answer questions at the end of the session. If we start to run over, Keith will still be available to answer for a little while longer. Dan will have to sign off. You can also send any questions that we don't have time to get to or that you think about later to either Dan or Keith. Their contact information is at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical issues, send us a note in the text box, and we'll try to see if we can resolve them for you. This presentation, like all of the ABPMP presentations, will be uploaded to the website in the next day or so, and you can access it anytime. If you haven't been there, it's probably worthwhile taking a look and see what else is in there. There are close to 15 other webinars on the website for members to access at any time, and it's worth poking around a little bit. We're going to be sending out emails on a new service that the association is starting. Now, this is a hint service, and we're looking for hints on problems that you've run into and fix, or any other things that you believe are useful to other practitioners. These are going to be reviewed, and they'll be put in a new area on the ABPMP website starting in September. This is meant to help us all to learn from one another and exchange information. So any hints or suggestions that stem from your experience, please shoot them in. Our presenters today are Dan Morris and Keith Loyce. These are both, in spite of the fact that they're wearing jackets in their pictures, they're really sleeves rolled up, hands-on guys who have a lot of experience in working with business transformation, process improvement, that sort of thing. Both of these guys also have done a lot of work in thinking through what's going on in this environment and what kind of changes are emerging. You'll find that they actually like being in the thought leadership position. There's a list of the types of activities that they engage in on the left-hand side of the slide that includes things ranging from ABPMP to PECS to a host of other environments. And on the right-hand side, you'll see some of the things that they have published that address various and sundry topics that deal with BPM and improving your business. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dan and Keith. Keep in mind, we will be shooting to answer questions at the end of the session. Thanks.
Thank you, Rod. Can we move to the next slide? There we go. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm Dan Morris. And one of the things that, we've noticed, and both, I'm a board member of ABPMP and with some other organizations also. But one of the things we've noticed is that in many companies, it seems that the process transformation activity has kind of hit a plateau, where the types of activities that they're involved in are pretty much stagnating. And by that I mean, if you're involved in larger activities now, that's great. That's where you're staying. You're not really typically then becoming the next step, which we look at kind of a thermometer or scale on the right-hand side that shows that moving up the scale, we look at improvement in different specific business areas, business units, moving up to department processes, to end-to-end process, and then starting to deal more strategically with customer experience. And what we're seeing is where organizations fit today, or on that scale, is pretty much where they're staying. So if a group has been focused on smaller, what we call fingers and toes reductions, which really translates into reductions of 1/2 an FTE, 1.5 FTEs. So those smaller benefit projects, that's pretty much where we're seeing them strategically stay. When we start to look at their budgets, we start to look at their growth patterns and the types of efforts that they're dealing with. So the question really then becomes, how do we move that to a place where they are really in charge of orchestrating multiple groups, multiple disciplines involved in the larger projects, and then moving forward at some point in time when the group is ready, moving forward to have a strategic impact on the operation itself. And there what we find is that some of the transformation groups work directly with the planners to, as plans are being considered, different strategies are being considered, to look at the impact on the processes, to look at the impact on the operation itself of some of those strategies, to see how they want to do them and how they may want to change their business model if they in fact do still want to move forward. Next slide please. In addressing these issues, we're really going to divide this discussion into two parts. We find that there's just really not enough time to cover it in about the 45 minutes of actual speaking time that we have in an individual webinar. So today we're going to look at the real promise of BPM, then move on to the capability maturity review. That review really is a lot different than the old maturity concept out of Gartner, and we'll be talking about that in a little while. And then looking at how we can start to transition BPM and the BPM groups within different organizations to a growth model. Next month, we'll continue and start to look at some of the essential elements, get into more detail on the capability maturity model, start to look at how do we take that information and build it into a roadmap that will help the BPM group grow in capabilities and grow in the types of support and therefore relevance in their companies. And then how do you support BPM as a strategic asset for leadership? Move to the next slide, please. Now, the promise of BPM is something that it will say varies depending on who you talk to. But in the first case, we know that BPM is a discipline, and it directs process improvement. Now, BPM itself is kind of looked at in a few different ways. There are what I call purists who say if it's not full end-to-end process, it's not BPM, because the process in BPM strictly says that you have to deal end-to-end. And look at how you have process owners and process managers, and how you then have different types of matrixed organization structures. I'm a little less, we'll say of a purist on that, and I look at process to sub-process to different layers that you go down to hit workflow. And a lot of us look at business transformation as being almost somewhat synonymous with process improvement, because sitting under transformation is one of the things that you need to do is to improve process at any level of abstraction that you need to. But the bottom line on that is that we need something to direct the way that improvement is going to be considered, to pull everybody onto the same page, so that we can move forward with the appropriate models and with appropriate information and really get into enterprise transformation. One of the neat things about BPM is it's collaboration-based, and it starts to pull together different people from different groups. Now, that's a two-edged sword because there are now multiple disciplines involved in these more significant projects. You'll have everything from business architecture to process architecture, enterprise architecture, different types of BPM. You'll have change management. So there's a lot of things that become involved in that, and that's where the orchestration today becomes so significant. And one of the key things that the BPMS tools today now are scalable. They'll support high transaction volumes, where in the past they really didn't do that. So today we now have a set of tools that allow us to essentially replace a lot of the legacy applications that have been holding us back in a lot of different companies. There are different ways to do that, and that's really the different ways become the topic of another webinar. But suffice it to say at this point that there are, in fact, a lot of different ways that we can now start to address those replacements and extensions to those systems, those capabilities. And finally, it's fast. Now, not as fast when you're setting it up, although faster than traditional. But once it's set up, it becomes very fast to modify, very low cost, and a very low risk. But we also find that it's failing to be essentially, it's really being mostly used in smaller efforts. The larger efforts that it's being used in are pretty much driven out of IT and are technology-based. It's not considered to be strategic in companies today. Everyone wants to change, and we see that there's going to be, we're predicting, that there's never going to be a time when we don't worry about cost reduction. But we are entering a period now where cost reduction is going to become secondary, we believe, to revenue growth and business expansion. That would make it strategic. Today it's not strategic, it's just there to save some costs. The delivery of value is a lot less than it could be. It's then not focusing on measurable improvement in value. And the key word there is measurable. It certainly is focused on saying, having the ability to say that there is value in what's been done, the performance has been improved, the quality has been improved. But when you start to look at quantifying those things, and you start to looking at that, at predicting what that value is going to be, you start to run into some serious problems because the infrastructure to do that simply isn't there today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, our role as BPM professionals obviously will vary by company. It'll vary by the group that we're in, if we're in IT or if we're in one of the business departments, or if we're associated at the executive level, so with the COO's office as an example. But there are certain common threads, regardless of where it's placed in the organization. And one of the things is that today we find that technology is moving and changing faster than the ability of most companies to absorb those changes. And not only absorb them from a technology perspective, actually changing their BPMS tools as an example, but also from a conceptual standpoint. As an example, now as we move into IBPM with simulation capabilities, with advanced analytic capabilities, with the ability to generate essentially web applications as well as social media applications right from the BPMS. We find that a lot of people haven't come to grips with what that really means and what those capabilities are for them, and in some cases still use the BPM concepts and the BPM tools at a very low level, essentially really as document management and just really an advanced drawing tool. Some cases they then move that forward. But we find that only in few cases are people able to keep up with the advances in the market. And a lot of that deals with the tools that people have, the way they're doing their projects, and a lot of internal factors that companies today just don't do the same type of technology research or business research that they once were able to do because staff's been cut so dramatically. But we find that what we need is at the executive level to start helping us to change the role of BPM in the company is, we recommend that people, whether it's have luncheons or a variety of different things, but with executive managers explaining what BPM and BPMS-enabled BPM, which is BPM supported by BPMS tools, what that really means, what they're capable of doing, the advantages of them, what can be expected within that environment. And within their environment, what are the limitations? What are the constraints? How can they get around those constraints? So it becomes an internal sales job to help first of all, help management understand what can be done. And then, second of all, to put the BPM group in a position where it can start to work with executive management to deliver more value than the fingers and toes that a lot of places are stuck in. Now, as we move forward, one of the things that some organizations are starting to recognize, and this gets back to the thermometer, when you get to the top of the essentially involvement or roles of BPM, at the top of that scale, you're now looking at how do you support the strategic differentiation of the business in the marketplace? How do you support the strategic execution of change within the company? And when you can start to do that, you then can really look at BPM and the BPMS group in a very different way. As a group that orchestrates, as a group that will help you determine the impact or the probable impact of a strategy, of a change to the business operating model. And through that, help them determine what strategy they really want to do and how they really want to execute that strategy. And it's kind of, in some ways, the difference between can you do something or should you do it. Moving on, today, as we look in a lot of different organizations, we find that the BPM groups really have no internal strategy amongst themselves. When you say, strategically, where do you want to go? How do you want to evolve? What do you want to do? And is there a strategy? Do you have a mission, a set of goals? They really don't. They're more reactive. And so one of the things that we believe in changing the role is within the BPM group itself, start to look at strategically how can they better support the organization that they're in and possibly other organizations that they touch. Put together a vision of what that really means. Put together a strategy to support that vision. And in the context of what we're talking about today, this becomes important because once you understand where you're at today, you can then start to look at how you want to change from where you're at to where you want to be. And with that, I am going to now turn the presentation over to Keith and picking it up with Seeing Your Future.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everybody. This, again, is Keith Luce, and I'm going to take this a little bit further. So Dan has done a nice job of kind of laying the foundation of where we are within our community, where the relative BPM, BPMS value is being perceived within organizations today. And certainly we've seen a lot of investment over the last 10 years, and this is a capability in organizations. And the research tells us that that's going to continue. The challenge we have now is how do we start to apply what we do with our internal clients, meaning how do we apply our techniques with regards to really taking a hard look at BPM, BPMS as a capability, and ask the real questions around how much value and how relevant is that capability within our organization today. We found literally by eating our own dog foods or applying our own methodology ourselves, we've come up with kind of a four-step process that we've been working with clients on to really do a dive into the world of BPM within your organization. And the first bubble here starts off with really a real rigorous review of what is your current capabilities, really understanding what your organization can do today. What's the level of value? What's the level of project that you're working on within your organization? How well does that align then with the overall business strategy? So we've got actually a pretty in-depth tool that we use, which has got over 160 different points that help tease out and understand what does BPM mean to you and your organization today. From there, working, as Dan was saying, how do we then start to identify what should the BPM capability be about? How does it really need to evolve and mature within your organization to increase the value, to become increasingly indispensable, as it were, to your business partners? From there, we then look at, so what is really the gap between where you are today and where you need to be with regards to your vision of BPM in your organization? And then finally, the fourth one is then saying, given that gap, how do we build an investment roadmap, much like we do with our internal clients, but how do we build an appropriate plan that says, for example, in the upcoming budget cycle that we have in many organizations today, where year end is coming up in 6 months, so we're starting to think about budgets in the fall, how do we make sure that BPM and BPMS continue to enjoy the same, if not increased, budget allocations because we are adding more relevancy and more value to our businesses? And the way we do this, and so I was mentioning we've got a deep dive tool, the intent is really then asking the questions and understanding from a deeper perspective across 10 different domains, things like, do we understand and have a clear vision for the future of our BPM capability? Do we have commitment both from our team as well as obviously the executive team? Do they understand what BPM and BPMS can be doing to really enable the strategic objectives, and are we well positioned as a team, as a function with the organization to really make that happen? Do we have the stakeholder buy-in? Do we have effective reality-based planning in place to make the BPM capability effective? Do we have clear tools and processes in place to demonstrate that we can identify what key issues are and then very quickly and nimbly execute solutions? And so that's what the first piece here is all about. From there, as I was saying, we then work to really understand where should that capability be. What is the vision and the strategy of BPM, and how does that then tie into and align then with the overall business strategy? Finally, we use a much more evolved, and we've used the Gartner capability or maturity model as a foundation, but we've taken it several steps further, where we really have a continuum here around what BPM and BPMS can be in organizations given the alignment to your overall business strategy. And we go into 24 different capability areas to really articulate then across these 8 different level maturities. And if you imagine the 24 capabilities across 8 different domains, very quickly you get close to 200 different cells, and those 200 different cells represent pretty clear articulation of what that capability should be given on your current maturity versus where you think the maturity should be. And then finally, you pull together an investment roadmap, which outlines where the investments going forward should be. As I said, the tool, there are 10 different domains, and you can see here they get into a fair amount of detail, but it's because we go into this level of detail to really understand with the BPM and BPMS teams, what are they doing and where do they see this capability really adding value in the organization? What do we see in terms of feedback from our internal business partners in terms of how they're engaging the BPM team. Are they, as Dan was saying, involving us in small cost-cutting initiatives, 1, 2, 5 FTEs, or are they pulling the BPM team into saying, we've got a customer experience or a customer journey. We're trying to really create that true differentiation from a strategic perspective, and we need you, the BPM experts, to really be joining and determining how do we create and deliver that experience in a very different kind of way. And we recognize the strategic value of that capability that we bring, and we're brought in at that level. So using this tool is a way of being very discreet, very concrete with regards to ensuring that we get the right information around where we are, and we use the latest BPM, BPMS thinking to really inform how we're capturing the data. And again, this is all intended to make sure we understand where we are, where we need to go, so that BPM doesn't fall victim to being marginalized or pushed over the side, especially when the budget cycle comes, as it always does. The second one, which is really then, once we understand where we are, is really then determining what then is the picture. Where do we see our BPM capability really tying into the strategy of the business? So where does BPM fit? Where does it fit into the organization in terms of the structure, the budget, the staff? What role do we envision it to play with regards to really helping drive the growth agenda of the business, doing what we've always been good, which is really helping manage the cost, but again, driving the growth agenda and really playing at a more significant transformational level, which is around things like the customer experience, thinking about how do we go to market, how do we build those capabilities with the business partners as members of the BPM community. And of course, we have to understand then, if we're going to play at that level and being able to demonstrate the value, well, what are our constraints? What is the level of competency that we need to be able to demonstrate so that we can be delivering at that higher level of value? As I was mentioning, using a much more of a rigorous maturity model, we then determine based on very discrete, there's actually over 24 different capability sets that we look at now, really looking very discreetly at the current maturity and where does that need to be based on the future vision of BPM and BPMS within the organization. And then how do we start to go from A to B? How do we build those capabilities? How do we start to invest in that given where we are and where we need to be? And these become very, very interesting discussions when we have it amongst ourselves within the BPM community in your organization, and then also ask questions of our business partners in our organization with regards to, so what is the reputation of BPM? How well are we delivering today? And do they understand and appreciate the heightened value that we can be provided if we get the appropriate investment to play at a higher level, or play at a higher game in effect? So really what we want to do is making sure that, how formal is the BPM group? Do we have a very clear mission of what the future is? How well do we then link to the corporate strategy and goals and tie ourselves into that, making sure that our business partners really know and understand then what is the strategy of our group, and how can we really start to add a much higher and differentiated value and be able to commit and deliver on that. The next talks a little bit about, again, using a very straightforward view of defining what is my vision for BPM, what are my current capabilities, what are the competencies that I need to be able to have in place to deliver on that, and then really understand where we stand with regards to a maturity model. And just like we do with our clients, we use very standard and rigorous methodologies to understand their current state and their as-is state and come up with recommendations to close the gap. What we're really doing, again, is applying the same rigor to our thinking with regards to, well, where do we see BPM and BPMS today, and how can we become much more of a strategic asset for our organization, and then how do we receive the funding to be delivering at a completely higher level. This is an illustration of then how do we then define where we are today. Are we at a level 1, 2, or 3? And then where's the gap with regards to where we believe we should be? Is that a level 5 or 6 or beyond? with regards to playing at a different level with regards to delivering value to our internal business clients. And that's really the conversation then we have, is once we understand where we are today, is then how do we start to really move that ball forward? What's really required in terms of the investments, and how do we sequence those investments over time so that we can be building our relative maturity with regards to what BPM is all about. And with that, Dan, I'm going to turn it back over to you to finish out on the last one, which really talks about then how do we make sure that we have the appropriate investment roadmap in place to drive the growth and expansion of BPM capability.
Well, thank you, Keith. One of the things that, before we get into the roadmap, since we have a little bit of time, Keith kind of gave a high-level look at what we do and the types of things that we've created to help drive this concept forward. I think one of the things that I'd like to make sure that everybody understands is that the things that we've laid out, things that we use, are things that you can create yourselves, things that you can, assuming that somebody within the organization has the appropriate background to define these things. You can do the same thing that we're talking about. You will be starting, and especially if you have a BPM Center of Excellence or Business Transformation Group, whatever it might be called, you're essentially starting an internal consulting operation. And the types of things that we're talking about are things that you'll need to do with your clients. And so, when you start to look at capabilities and the matrix that Keith was showing and talking about, one of the things that we've recognized is, that matrix, we're constantly expanding that matrix ourselves to customize it to individual needs within companies. And the matrix that you create for your organization based on the capabilities that you believe are important for your group to provide will need to be customized. They'll need to be, you define them within the context of your company and the types of services that the BPM group will provide. And so within the context of those services, what are the capabilities that you need? And then within each of those capabilities, where do you stand from a maturity standpoint in your journey to becoming experts in each of the capability areas? Now, the strategy, and that takes a lot of work, frankly, to lay that out, because in each of the capabilities at each of the competency levels, which align to different maturity levels in the journey, those competencies will be essentially defined through, we'll say, multiple evaluations or multiple characteristics. So it becomes a fairly significant activity, but once you do that, you now have the ability to look at what you need to do, and as you start to travel forward through the development of these capabilities and these competencies, to be able to put together the roadmap that we're about to talk about, and training programs and a lot of other things. And you'll be able to clearly identify and justify changes in your business model, changes in the way that you want to operate, who you want to deal with, what you want to deal with, the technology that you want to deal with. And so it gives you a foundation then to talk to executive management in more concrete terms about exactly how the organization is going to evolve and why, and what that evolution is going to mean. The second part of what Keith was talking about deals then again with the strategy. Well, that strategy has to be defined based on a vision of where this organization is going to go and the role it's going to play in the company, and at what point it's going to do that. When you layer that in, you can now say, what are the capabilities capabilities that I'll need at that point in time, and what are the competency levels within each of those capabilities. That will give you a target for some point in the future. Now, as we start to move forward, and we then start to look at, the role of not IT, but the role of BPM in the organization. Where is it at? And based on that target, okay, essentially the strategic definition of where this is going at some point in the future, you now have to ask yourself the question, is the role of BPM expanding or shrinking? Depending on the vision of where this fits into the organization and the type of services, capabilities, competencies, you'll clearly be able to see whether or not executive management considers this to be a function that is critical to the business operation or a nice-to-have function. If you are able to be critical to the organization, that'll be reflected in budget, it'll be reflected in staffing, it'll be reflected in the type of projects that you have. On the other hand, if the organization is kind of stagnating, you'll see that clearly. And so now you're in a position to say, how do I change this to provide more value? Because your placement from a vision standpoint will be based on the perceived value of the BPM operation in the company. So the question becomes then, how do you improve that perceived value? How do you increase the role of the operation in the company? And so you can look at where you are today and what's the reputation of the group in the company, and that'll be clearly reflected by the vision of how the group's going to perform and fit into the organization. And it's often eye-opening to a lot of people. There's a lot of groups that we talk to that are down in the what we'll call the fingers and toes benefits, that think they're doing a great job, and in fact they are. But in the whole scheme of things, the question is the benefit that a group is delivering, is it relevant in the bigger picture? And if the answer to that is it's a nice to have, but it's not relevant, well, then the group is potentially open to be dissolved. It's potentially open to be reorganized into another group, and the list goes on and on, even though it's doing a good job. So the question really is, how do we position the group to be recognized in the company as being a critical element to the success of the operation itself? And the goal here then is to, as you're putting together a roadmap, to use this information in a little bit different way. And that different way then starts to answer certain questions, like where do we want to be? How do we want to play in the company? What is the benefit that we think we could bring to the company? And how can we bring very, very significant benefit to the company? And that then allows you to start to move forward in a very different way. Now, certainly you need to continue to have successful projects at the level that you're dealing with today, but it also allows you now to start to go after different types of projects, different types of interactions, different types of training, and to look at guiding the evolution of the organization in a way that will ultimately get you to where you envision the organization is playing in the company. So the big questions, moving to the next slide, the big questions really that you have to ask yourself is, what do we need to do to be indispensable? Because once you're indispensable, you are delivering a great deal of value to the company. And the bottom line on any group is, what value do you bring to the overall organization in terms of helping it succeed, gain market share, improve revenue, and improve margin. And so how do you do that? How do you become indispensable? And that's something that really needs to be based on discussions with managers and levels above, and looking at how you can increase that value from their perspective. Because I would submit that just as my perspective is my perspective, what really counts is the perspective of the people who are evaluating what you're doing. So the questions are, what do we need to do to deliver more benefit, and how can we then be evaluated, and what success look like in that journey? Those answers then get folded in to an overall, we'll say, roadmap as to how things can move forward. Keith, we can move to the next slide. So we're now at the roadmap slide. And we can now start to say, if we're going to change the capabilities based on a new vision, based on a new direction, how do we do that? What do we need to do to make that happen? And the roadmap is where you start to now take the answers to those questions and put them in a time sequenced progression from where you are now across really multiple years. What can you accomplish this year? How much can you move forward? And then next year, how can you build on that and move forward again? And by tying this into the budget process, what you're now able to do is start to sell this migration that we're talking about defining, and how you can use that to sell your vision and to essentially obtain additional budget, additional resources, so you can, with those resources, now clearly say, once we have this, this is now the next step management. This is now what we can do based on that. So it allows you to put together a very defined plan as to how you're going to progress. And from a capability perspective, from a delivery perspective, a benefit perspective, and a perspective of the value that the operation ultimately will bring to the company. So the roadmap allows you then to define how you want to get there. It allows you to put together an investment plan, because the roadmap will then say, here's, from a training perspective, here's what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, and what we're going to get out of it. From a technology perspective, the same thing. From different types of projects that you're going to try to go after, different ways you're going to tie into strategic implementation or strategic execution. So it allows you, from a variety of perspectives, to start to look at what's going to happen and what management can expect from that investment in your organization. So it really gives you a clear path moving forward, and it gives you the foundation for those discussions with management. At this point, can we move to the next slide? As I mentioned, in July, we're going to cover some additional topics and get into more detail on what's this matrix look like? When we talk about the capability maturity model, how does that differ from what Gartner put out in the past? What does it really mean? How do you put it together? And what are the types of things that you need to look at as you're starting to look at both the baseline model and then the model of where you're going to be in the future. I will talk about how you translate that and move that into models that will allow you to create your roadmap and start to move forward. Can we move to the last slide, please? Okay. as Rod indicated earlier, Keith and I, and Rod too, do a lot of writing, and we do a lot of speaking in different locations. One of the things, we write mainly through the Process Excellence group text, although we do write, for other sources. But our latest paper is something we'll be happy to send out to anybody who is interested. So our contact information is there. Please let us know if you're interested. We'll be happy to send out both the slide deck, this presentation, as well as the paper itself. For other papers, other topics, if you go out to the PEC's website and key in my name, it'll give you a list of probably about 30 papers, columns that are out there. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Rod. And Rod, any questions that people have for us?
None posted at the moment, Dan.
Okay. Are there questions? I know we couldn't have been all that complete, and I'm hoping people are still out there. So do we have any questions for us?
I've got one. What would be the minimum revenue threshold by an organization that could support the BPM process with a good chance of being accepted? The cost of the BPM formal group by the organization to embrace BPM as an internal department.
Keith, do you want to kick that off, or do you want me to?
Now, let me speak to that. I've actually run BPM groups at companies like American Express, Prudential, and the threshold that we tend to use is a function of really two things. One is, what is the cost return that I'm going to bring back to the organization? And then secondly is, where do we see BPM contributing to the revenue or revenue capture of the organization? There isn't a good rule of thumb that says if I'm a $100 million company, I should invest $1 million in BPM. What we do see instead is BPM teams are put in place, and they have their own internal objectives, which say they need to, at a bare minimum, somewhere between 5 and 10x return on their budget. So if I've got a budget of $1 million for a BPMS team, they need to be delivering in excess of their collective cost. So if I've got a staff of X, I've got licenses for various tools, what is that total? And then I need to be able to make a compelling case to management saying, well, if I get that $1 million investment, for example, here's what we can do with that. Because again, leadership is looking and saying, well, I have $1 million I can invest perhaps in BPM, or I can use that $1 million on a variety of other things. I can do product development. I can create a marketing campaign. I can build some new tools, mobile applications from the IT department's perspective. So everybody's vying for limited funds, and as we've talked today, the challenge for us as a BPM community is to demonstrate that we are a strategic asset to the organization, and we contribute in a very significant way to the success of the business objectives. Dan, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, in a lot of companies, the BPM group seems to be a cost center, and it really needs to, in a lot of ways, straddle the fence between being a cost center and a critical element in creating revenue. And that revenue creation can happen in a lot of different ways. But as long as you're a cost center, at that point you have a very different, you're viewed very differently, I should say, within the organization. Because as a cost center, everybody's trying to reduce costs.
I'll give another quick example. Some work I did recently is around the product development life cycle for an organization. So this is classic, what we could call BPM or even re-engineering work, where their product development life cycle was not nearly delivering new products. So by redefining that process and working with the leadership, we didn't change the cost of how the process worked, We just made it much more effective. As a result, that organization was able to create and deliver solutions to their market not only quicker, but they were able to create more and different products that they had never been able to do in the past. So by doing so and really re-engineering that product development life cycle, we contributed fundamentally to the ability to generate top-line revenue, which is something the organization was struggling to do.
And another example of that deals with the whole customer experience. You know, a lot of organizations are really, right now, I would say, wrestling with, you know, what does that really mean and how can they really do something with that concept to increase their sales. Once you look at customer experience is a process with a set of sub-processes that touch a lot of different things, you can now start to look at overall how you want to look at customers. Now, and you know, and this is really kind of a basic but profound change, because now you're no longer looking at how you can cut some costs, you're looking at how you can help them generate revenue. And generate revenue through, you know, anytime a customer touches the company, what's the process? What does that look like? What are the problems with it? How do you get a common look and feel across all the touch points? So there are a lot of different things that you can do that. But coming back to the question, I know we've kind of moved away from the question a little bit, but I don't think that there's a rule of thumb, at least I haven't seen one. I've seen that a lot of transformation projects have not been done because oftentimes you can't justify the acquisition of a BPMS, Business Process Management Suite, through one project, which a lot of companies try to do. So, you know, that becomes a hurdle that you know, in some places you'll need to get past. But, you know, we see revenue often, I mean, not revenue, we see the costs often being in a mid-sized company, you know, somewhere between $5 and $10 million right now, and we think that that's going to increase. Now, that's not including the IT part, where the people will actually then get into the BPMS solution generation and the interfacing and the data side and all that type of thing. So when you add it all together, it's probably somewhere around, oftentimes around $15 million that we see. Although that's not a rule of thumb, it's just kind of some of the things that we've been dealing with. I should, you know, augment that with, I know in some large organizations, especially on the IT side, it's nothing for this to be $40 million or $50 million, because they're leveraging the BPMS tool, big projects, 100, 200 people, and so it can get pretty high when you start to add in the BPM work that has to be done.
While we're waiting for additional questions, it's interesting. There's been a trend, whereas in the past we saw a lot of people focused on organizational effectiveness, Six Sigma, Lean, and certainly as a black belt, I understand the capabilities of those types of methodologies. However, they tend not to be able to deliver very tangible value then to the business. It's one thing to, you know, make a process have higher quality, but it's completely different to be able to say I can help reduce a key process cost, or I can re-engineer it to deliver a different member experience or customer experience. And it's in that reframing that the BPM community really has demonstrated a different kind of value and delivered that kind of value. So I think our challenge as a community is, how do we take where BPM is today in the organization, and then how do you continue to elevate it and make sure that leadership understands, well, we're doing this kind of work today. However, we really look forward to an opportunity to elevating our respective game to get more involved with delivering on those higher, more strategic objectives of the organization.
We have BPM and business transformation itself has one real benefit that a lot of places, a lot of things really have never had, and that includes business reengineering, and that was followed by business improvement. And what that amounts to is we have a heavy investment in technology, BPMS technologies. And that means it's really not going to go away quickly. The problem, though, is that it's moving more and more towards the technology side and more away from the business side, which is something we have to, as a community, we have to look into and we have to address. Because with BPM, we have an opportunity to truly meld the business side and the technology side together into a common solution. But because of the investment that's already been made, it's not likely that business transformation, business process management will ever be considered a fad, which is something that we always want to avoid. Any other questions?
There are none listed.
Well, with that, hopefully we've given people something to think about. I thank you all for joining us today, and please send in any questions that may come up, anything you may think about, and we always like to hear from people. If there are any topics that the people who might still be on the webinar would like to see addressed in the future, please let us know about that, and we will try to set that up. With that, thank you all for joining us today,